Hello, my name is Catherine Davison, and I'm going to talk to you about PTSD and trauma. But before I get into that, I just wanted to tell you a brief story about someone close to me that knew someone suffering with PTSD. My husband knew someone very close to him, and they suffered a traumatic event. And after a while, he noticed this person slowly slipping deeper and deeper into PTSD, which is very heartbreaking for him and very sad. So with that being said, I want to talk about PTSD, the effects that it has on an individual, and if there's any delayed onset to it, and the symptoms for it. So imagine you're making a bed, and you make it the first time and the sheets aren't tucked in properly, and you wake up the next day and they're on the floor. The next day you go to fix it, and then you place the pillow wrong, and the night that you sleep on it, you wake up sore. Then you have a family member coming over who's very, very particular about how their bed's made, and you're in a panic because all you can think about is how you made it wrong one time and they made it wrong again, and just all these issues and all this stress and building up to it. And then eventually you just wake up and you're like, I am sitting here crying on this bed over making a bed that is not made, and none of this is working out. Some of that is signs of PTSD. I know it's a very simplified version, but I think it explains just how severe and more deeper it can get. So let's look at the deeper effects of a serious trauma that can happen to people. There's different signs of PTSD, from disassociation to just completely zoning out and not being able to interact with other people around you. And the Mayo Clinic Family Health book looks at disassociation and flashbacks. And some of the signs that they have listed, there's very, very many of them on their page, is like eating disorders, stress, irritability, self-harm, and just many, many, many different variations of symptoms that can occur. But that's just a few of the main ones. Sometimes PTSD can be very delayed, and through my research, Alexander McFarlane researched PTSD very extensively and heavily, and noticed that sometimes when you go through a traumatic event, PTSD is delayed up to 6 months or more, and it's usually roughly around the 6 month mark that you're not going to notice anything. But there are other things ahead of that that can tell you that you're going to slip into PTSD. And when he was doing a study on the long-term and short-term effects of PTSD in World War I soldiers, he noticed that some of them suffered greater from it that had past traumas, and then other people that didn't. They were able to get through it quicker. And he was like, that's curious. And then Naomi Breslow said that multiple previous events had a stronger effect than a single previous event. So in both of their researches, they noticed that people with past traumatic events strongly suffered from PTSD if something later in life happened to be quite traumatic. And they noticed that, and they're like, hey, okay, so what can you do to go about the treatment of PTSD? You have to do intensive therapy, and it's all very individualized to the person. There is no magic cure for it, and it can sometimes take 6 months, or it can take more than 6 months. There's no end term goal, but the goal is obviously not to keep going to therapy. But if you have to keep going, even if it's just like once every 3 months, keep going, because it will be helpful. But they start with an evaluation on your entire history, and they see if you do have past traumas, because that does affect how you're going to act later. Because even in that before that 6 month period of the traumatic event an individual has experienced, They want to see whether or not it's going to lead to something far worse, or if they can nip it in the butt to help and get good coping mechanisms. Find out if that individual has bad coping mechanisms. Sometimes medication may be administered temporarily, such as anxiety medication, insomnia medication, just to help the individual deal with everyday life, because sometimes certain smells, the way things sound, like having a car door shut or a loud noise, can affect a person and bring them right back into that flashback. So sometimes anxiety medication helps with that, or insomnia pills to help with nightmares, recurring nightmares of the same event over and over that an individual is currently experiencing. But I want everyone to remember that PTSD is not visual and it is not predictable, and it can happen to anyone. Sometimes PTSD can happen and you wouldn't know it in another person. And if it does happen to you, it's very important to remember, what do these symptoms look like? Am I disassociating from people? Am I blurring out certain things and waking up and going, whoa, what happened? Where did I go? Am I feeling anxious from a certain smell, noise, sound, anything? But it can happen to everyone. And in the story that I mentioned earlier about my husband being very close to someone suffering with it, that person is me. But I'm getting through it, and I'm using the tools that I have to help me get better. Thank you for watching my video.